Hey everyone, here is how I use the Creations by Michiè pattern number 138 to make these adorable flannel PJs for Henry. And I did modify the pattern to have them smocked at the top of the pants, but after doing all of that, I do not think I will be repeating that again. Now I do have a separate video explaining how I did that using just the geometry, but yeah, I would just gather, or I would pleat yours, like using box pleats or whatever, unless you are up for a challenge. But anywho, you'll have 2 bodice fronts cut on the fold as well as 2 bodice backs cut on the fold, and then I am making the version with long sleeves, so I have 2 of those to cut out. I also went ahead and did the collar, so I have 4 of those cut out, and finally I have those pleated pant leg thingamabobbers, 2 fronts and 2 backs. But again, only do this if you're up for a challenge, and it kind of turns into one of those make it work situations. I can just hear Tim Gunn from Project Runway saying that. Make it work. So for the collar, I took this adorable knife pleated trim and I sewed it around the collar. Friendly reminder, Creations by Michiè patterns use a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, so I'm just trying to keep my stitches around that mark. Then I put the collar lining right sides together and stitched the 2 together with the previous stitches from that piping facing up, so I can stitch right inside of those stitches. And this leaves a really neat transition. And by neat, I mean tidy. Then I trimmed that seam allowance down, turned the collar right sides out, and gave it an ironing. Moving on to that bodice, I constructed it using that lovely bodice ring that I like so much. So basically you'll have a front, back, and then attach them all at the shoulder seams. And then you can iron these shoulder seams open and put the front bodice pieces together with the right sides touching. I give that an ironing, and if I wasn't attaching the collar, I would just sew around the neckline now. But I am attaching the collar, and before I do that, I need to put some basting zigzags around the seam allowance area so the collar will stay together. You really do want to avoid a gap in between the collar if at all possible. I mean, don't be too hard on yourself, but adding some wide basting zigzags is an easy way to avoid a gap. Then I pinned that center of the collar to the center of the bodice front, and once I was done pinning, I flipped the bodice lining back on the whole assembly and took it to my machine to sew from one center back around that neckline to the other center back. Then I clipped all around the neckline and understitched it since it was a tad bulky due to the flannel. Just really quick here, understitching, you'll flip the entire seam to the lining side and then stitch on the right side of your garment just really close to that previous seam. Then I pressed those corners out and gave everything a really good ironing. I also took out those basting zigzag threads. Then I could put the bodice aside and work on those sleeves. I ran 2 rows of gather stitches on top and on the bottom of the sleeve, and having 2 rows really helps keeps your gathers straight when you go to sew on top of them later on. Then I cut a piece of this pleated trim to the length of my sleeve band and gathered my sleeve up until it fit that length. First I basted the trim onto the sleeve before getting that sleeve band. I made my sleeve band 2 inches wide so I could fold it in half, give it an ironing, and attach it to the sleeve, matching up those raw edges. And I stitched with the previous stitches facing up, so again I could sew right inside of those suckers. And then I ironed that band over, and it just so happened that the folded edge of the band lined up with those machine stitches. But if your seam is too wide, just trim it down until it fits. I'll use those machine stitches to sew the band down later, and I do have a detailed video that explains that process that is linked below. So then I basted the bodice together around the armhole in preparation for that sleeve. I eased the sleeve in, and I do have a detailed video that goes over that process as well. So once I finished easing both sleeves onto the bodice, then I can move on to the bottom of the bubble. Like I said, I wouldn't do this again with the smocking at the top, such a pain, but in case you are curious, here is how I put it together. I joined the front of the pants together down that center crotch using French seams, and I repeated the same thing with the back of the pants. I also put in a continuous placket in the back of the pants, and I have a detailed video on this placket method that is linked below. So then I adjusted the gathers so they were evenly distributed, and then I ironed on some of this freezer paper. This stuff is magical, and it really helps hold your pleats from moving on you or getting squashed as you're going to sew on top of them. It is linked below. I've also heard you can get it from Walmart or whatever. Just go get you some. It is wonderfully magical stuff. So useful. And then I sewed my pants to the bodice pieces, and from there I sewed up the side seams and serged the raw edges since this was kind of too thick for a French seam. I suppose I could have done a Hong Kong seam, but whatevs. I'm just rolling with the serger. And then I finished up that crotch area by turning up the raw edge, ironing it down, and turning it up again about an inch or so. It's enough room to attach those snap setters, snaps by snap source. Oh, so many S's and snaps. And then I sewed all of that down, and finally I hemmed up those pants by turning them up twice and sewed that into place. And after I did all those hand finishings and the smocking, I had these adorable PJs, great for the winter time. I hope this video was helpful. If y'all have any questions, please leave them in the comments below and I will do my best to answer them. And as always, guys, I appreciate y'all for watching, and I hope to catch y'all next time.